Hey, we are starting a new series today, and it is called Once Upon a Time. We've all heard that phrase. Maybe we've all told a story or read a story to a child that starts with once upon a time, the start of many famous stories, all different kinds of legends. This opening line that's become famous because it primes us, the listener, for a story, and it frames the narrative to come. It opens up our mind to imagination and creativity, and it invites us in to capture our attention. And that's what stories do. And sometimes real life stories do the same thing. In fact, there's a story that captured some local attention this week that we want to share with you as we start today. And some of you may have already heard about this. For some of you, it's going to be new. So let's go back once upon a time to the land of Milford, Michigan, and take a look at what's been going on in our world just this week.
But we begin tonight with fears of a 4-foot-long alligator on the loose at Kensington Metro Park. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Carolyn Clifford. Park officials are not 100% certain of the sighting, but they are not taking any chances for sure. They launched an all-out search of the lake tonight and want people to be on alert in case danger is lurking in the water. 7 News Detroit reporter Brett Cast is in Milford Township tonight, where the search is on.
Although this alligator has not been confirmed, this situation is not being taken lightly. If you can see over my shoulder, way in the distance out there, there's some lights out there. Those are actually search boats, some of them with wraparound lighting that are searching well into the night. There was a drone overhead that was also shining a light on the lake, but so far, no gator has been found.
It's been 8 years since Travis Whitaker took his dad's old sailboat out on Kent Lake, but today's trip, a bit different than he remembered.
We're always having to be worried out here about, logs and seaweed, but now we got alligators. Anything's possible, right? I mean, you never know. But, that's why we like to sail in Michigan and not in Florida. And, we're in a sailboat, so, we don't have a motor, to run away. So we gotta hustle.
Oh, only our pastor, He put in our staff Slack, hey, you guys need to watch the Channel 7 News, and that concerns me, But you might still be worried, though, about the actual story. Is there actually an alligator in Kensington Metro Park? Well, I'm happy to tell you that I got a call from Travis last night. He went back and checked, and safe and sound. Travis got him. All right, so you are safe to resume your boating and fishing activities. Oh, I love that. So here's the thing. I was visiting with my mom yesterday, and I showed her that video. I'm like, did you hear what happened with Travis? She's like, no. And I showed it to her, and she watched it, and she said, is that real? Is that something that Miles City just made? I'm like, I can see why you'd think that. He's literally wearing all the gear, and his interview style is interesting. It was a real video, but that kind of lends to another question. Was there really a gator? Somebody said they saw one, but they haven't found one. There's a helicopter being searched. They called in the Detroit Zoo and all this stuff. Did somebody just confuse some sticks and some leaves for what they thought was a gator? But a lot of stories leave us doubting. A lot of stories leave us wondering about how true it actually is. And maybe that's where you are as it relates to the Bible. Maybe that's where you are when you come to church and you hear us open up the Word of God and we read it and you say, I don't know, did that really happen? Is that a true story? Maybe you've listened, or maybe you've even read some yourself to do some examination. You're just not sure where you stand on all of it. Today we're going to start the book of Ruth together, and we're going to go through all 4 chapters. I would ask you, as we do that, though, and if you're here with us every week, or if you're watching online, not just to take my word for it as I speak this morning, or whoever's going to take our stage for the next few weeks to walk us through this journey, but to get the journal and examine it yourself and read through it yourself. I would encourage you to dive into Scripture, because I believe that the Bible holds up to scrutiny. I think if we go in looking for what we can see as validity or truth, we will find it. And so despite our series being called Once Upon a Time, we don't believe that this story of Ruth is a fairy tale. We believe that it truly happened. Ruth is no Cinderella. There is no Sleeping Beauty. But what there is elements of a good story. There's conflict, and there's drama, and there's interpersonal relationships. But the difference is they truly happen. So we can read through these decisions that people make and see how it affects their relationships and their relationship with God. And hopefully we can learn from it, because it's a real document of history, and events that took place have been preserved by God to inform us and to help instruct us, so sometimes we don't have to make the same mistakes that someone else made. And I think this story is a great reminder that we all play a part in God's story. He's the author, he's the one writing it, but he has written you into his story. And what role you play, you may not have figured out yet, but page by page, chapter by chapter, God is writing a story, and sometimes we miss it in the bigness of life. And our hope is that as we read this story, that you might see some things going on in your life on the pages of the story and see how we can open up our hearts and our minds to learn from what we read and move us more towards God. Today specifically, we're going to see tension. And we're going to see tension that's caused by how easy it is to settle in life and settle for things that are not the best choices for us and how dangerous that can be. But before we do that, would you mind praying with me? Father, we come to you this morning. We thank you for who you are. We thank you that you are a God. In Psalm, I believe 116 says you bend down to listen to us. God, I thank you that you can hear not just my voice as I speak audibly to you, but for those who are praying in their hearts right now, you hear all of us. You care for all of us and you love all of us. I pray that you would prepare our minds, prepare our hearts. Take away anything that might distract us from hearing from you in these next few minutes. God, I pray for myself as I speak that you just kind of sort of remove me from this situation and just take over and show off. May you be honored, may you be glorified, and may you speak to us in our needs and in our hearts and where we are today. We thank you and we love you. In your name we pray. Amen. So, all right, it's time. Grab your, not John journals, we've got Ruth journals now. And if you got a Ruth journal, first thing you might have noticed, it's a lot smaller than the John journal. There is only 4 chapters in the book of Ruth. Did anyone not get one? Anyone not have a Ruth journal? I got a free one. Oh, listen. First service, come on, take it, man. First service, I was made to look like a bad guy. I handed one to this lady, and Sierra over here, she goes, it's my birthday. I'm like, well, should have been faster. The lady gave it to her, though, so, it all works out. You can get those afterwards. But the Ruth story is only 4 chapters. You could honestly read it in one setting. You could read the whole book of Ruth like you would read a story. It's a quick, easy read, but we're going to go chapter by chapter. So this morning, today, we're going to go through the very first chapter of Ruth, and we're going to start right in verse 1. It says, in the days where the judges ruled, and we'll pause 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 words in, we're going to pause. Because right there, what we see is some evidence of the validity of the story because it gives us a timeline. It gives us a frame of reference. Oh, this happened at this point in time. We now know when the story of Ruth happened. You say, okay, well, when the judges ruled. What we know from history is that the period of judges was somewhere between 13th century BC to about 1050 BC. It happened before the first king of Israel, who was King Saul, was crowned king. So Israel did not have a king yet. And so what was life like during that time? Well, we can go back 1 page in our Bible to the last verse in the book of Judges, which tells us this. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So this is the landscape of the story of Ruth. There are no kings. There are judges that are raised up from time to time. It tells you everything you need to know about what's going on with Israel when Ruth is taking place. There's no king. It's a time of rebellion. It's one of the darkest stains in Israel's history, and it's basically a time of anarchy. People just do what they want. They're ignoring the laws, they're ignoring the commands, and they do what they want, and they're trapped in this constant cycle of rebellion. It's this vicious circle. They were deep in sin. They would get attacked from outside forces. They'd cry out to God for help. God would raise up a judge to warn them and rescue them, and then they would just do what they wanted to do, and they'd fall right back into those same patterns, those same behaviors, and it would just repeat itself. Another judge would pop up to warn them and rescue them. They'd turn, then they'd go right back to it, and it just happened over and over and over again. And that's where we're at as we go back to Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. It says, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So first verse, we see that a famine breaks out in the land in Bethlehem. And so one, that's interesting because the name Bethlehem literally means the house of bread. So the house of bread, literally doesn't even have food. So it's a bad situation. They're in the land of bread. They have no food. And it's an intense time, and it's a level of intensity that we really don't understand. We all live here in America, and I don't think any of us have ever experienced true famine. Maybe 1 or 2 of us ever have. Most of us don't even know what it's like to have to miss a meal. I certainly don't. This past week, my wife called me from work, and we were talking about dinner, and she's like, I'm so hungry when I get home. Can dinner be ready? Can we get Mexican food? I'm like, yeah, of course, say less, you know? So she called, and they said, Mexican Fiesta, we're out of beans. And I'm like, what? How are you a Mexican restaurant? You don't have, Gordon Foods is next door. Like, go get some beans. That's our situation. Food is so easy to come by here that it stuns us when somebody's like, we don't have any food. I'm like, what? Go get some. Like, it's so easy to get food. We don't struggle. We still had dinner. We didn't miss a meal. That's the closest I've come to a famine all week. Like, I didn't get beans with my Mexican food. And then we ordered it a couple days later, and they forgot to give us our beans. I felt like God was really testing me, all right? So, but I don't know what famine's like. So it's hard for me to put myself in the place of these people. But what we see is in verse 2, it says, the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. These took Moabite wives. The names of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. So one thing about the story of Ruth is that it does not waste any time. We get right into the drama. We are 5 verses in, 3 people have died, there's a famine in the land, and somebody is named Orpah. It is just wild right from the start of the book of Ruth. Like, there is no skipping a beat, all right? Talk about a fairy tale coming to a crash. People are dying, people are starving, people are uprooting their land and they're moving. And Naomi, the wife who's left behind to pick up the pieces, is the one we really see a lot of here in chapter 1 and really throughout the book. And I'm pretty sure Naomi didn't sign up for this when she married Elimelech. She probably didn't expect that this was the way her life would go, that she would leave the land that she knew, that she would go to a foreign land, that her husband and her children would die, and she would have to see this. And she's probably scratching her head wondering, how did it get here? How did it get to this? Maybe that's where you're at today. You're here, and I'm glad that you're here. But man, if you're being honest, you're here because you are carrying so much baggage, and you are wondering about your life. How did my life get to where it's at? Why is my life going the way that it's going? And you genuinely don't really know how it happened. You just find yourself in this spot and you say, how did my life turn out this way? Well, for Naomi, let's see what we can learn about how her life wound up where it is and what we can learn from this scenario. First, let's look at Elimelech, the husband who passed away. He won't be in the story anymore. His name, Elimelech, means God is king. That's what Elimelech means. But in the few actions that we see him make, I question how much he truly believed that to be true. See, he makes the decision to uproot his family, take his family, and leave Bethlehem and go to Moab. Bethlehem was a land God promised to his people. Moab wasn't. And you might say, well, why would you blame him, Jordan? I mean, there's a famine. He had to go somewhere. Listen, this is not like moving from Northville to Plymouth Township. It's not going from Livonia to South Lyon or anything like that. We need to understand that Moab was not just another city. Moab was a pagan city. It was a forbidden city for the people of Israel. We don't have time to go there, but if you go to Genesis chapter 19, you can learn about how the Moabites came to be, and it starts with sin. And then you go to Numbers 25, and you can see when the Israelite men interacted with some Moabite women, and what happened is 24,000 people died as a result. And there's all kinds of warnings about Moab, and God makes it clear not to engage with the Moabites. In fact, Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3, God lays out this law. He says, no Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord even to the 10th generation. God makes it clear, stay away from Moab. Don't go there. And yet, Elimelech takes his family and settles there. So today I wonder, are you settling with your shepherding? When it comes to leading your family, are you settling with what you're doing? Now, I don't think that Elimelech was wrong for caring about wanting to provide for his family. As a husband, as a father, I want to make sure that my family, my wife, my children are provided for. I can understand his concern there. But I have to wonder, did he care more about his family's physical needs at the expense of their spiritual needs? Because he took them to a place that God forbid them to go to. He took them and surrounded his family with people that God told him not to be around. And Elimelech plops his family down right in the middle of it. He was all about getting food on the table, not a bad thing. But it can become a bad thing if we neglect putting spiritual food into the bellies of our families. He led his family away from the presence of God. If you're a husband or a father in the room, I want you to really lean into the story of Elimelech. What a reminder for us. Elimelech's failures and mistakes are written so we don't have to make them ourselves. Dads, husbands, the world is going to constantly try to get us to settle when it comes to leading our families. It's going to try to constantly get us to settle for things that are not glorifying or edifying to God. And they may be things that we feel we can justify or rationalize or say that they are okay. We can get caught up so easily in the American dream and keeping up with the Joneses and giving our families this or providing them that or working those extra shifts so they can have the nicer clothes or signing our kids up for different programs and activities, and not just one, but 2, 3, 4, because we can't just have our kids sitting at home. They've got to be busy, right? And so we take this risk of what we consider success in our world. And we chase after, and sometimes what happens is we remove the presence of God in our lives because we're filling everything up with other things. And again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying, hey, pull your kids out of sports, pull your kids out of everything, and just read the Bible to them. I'm not saying that. I love sports. I have a son who played basketball all through high school. I have a daughter who's in competitive dance. Sometimes she's at the dance academy more than she's at home. Like, she dances a lot, and she loves it, all right? But we have to have proper order. And sometimes the things that we do and those things that we invest our time and our efforts and our money and our hearts, if we're being honest, our hearts are invested in those things. We shift the order of priorities in our home and in our families. And all of a sudden, God starts getting knocked down a couple pegs. And anything that takes precedence in our home over our children, our wives, or our own relationship with Christ, we have missed the mark. Before I came to Miles City, I was a youth pastor at another church. And I did that for several years. I loved it. And not every kid that we had pastor or ministry was a success story. In fact, I think of one kid as I was reading this message and preparing. I had a young man. I loved this kid, man. He was awesome. But he's sort of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And just to summarize the story, give you a bullet point, he went to summer camp, got his life right, said, I want to serve Jesus. I want to follow Jesus. I said, what does that look like for you? That's cool that you want that, but what does that look like? We need to come up with an action plan. He said, I know what I need to do, and it sounds weird. I said, what is it? He goes, I need to tell my dad I need to quit football. I said, oh, why do you need to quit football? He's like, well, once season starts, practice is going to keep me from youth group. Games are going to happen on the days of events, and I'm going to miss church, but then also, too, I'm going to be in the locker room with these guys, and I know what they're like, and I know what they're doing, and I know what they're going to want me to do, and I know how strong I am, and I know I'm going to cave. I said, okay, if that's what you think, then you need to talk to your dad. Now listen, his dad went to church. His dad was involved in the church. His dad was active in the church. Christian man. So I thought going to dad and talking to him saying, hey, Dad, I want to follow Jesus and I want to step out of sports. I didn't think Dad would have a problem with it. I was wrong. Dad said, absolutely not. You will not quit football. You made a commitment. You will see it through. He said, hey, man, you just got one more season. You can go back to youth group after the season's over. You can go to the events after the games are over. You can get back into church when things are done. And that's what we do sometimes. Listen, we say, hey, there's time for Jesus after this. There will be time for Jesus after that. There will be time for Jesus when this is done. There's always time for Jesus until there's no time for Jesus. And that's the problem we run into sometimes. And I wish I could tell you that this was a fairy tale ending with this young man, that things changed, but really that trajectory is one he stayed on to this day. I don't think he's been in church in 5-6 years. Now, here's the thing. According to the world standards, this kid is a success. Every box checked. He is rich. He's not even 30 years old. He's wealthy, living down in Texas. He's got multiple properties of the Airbnbs. He is richer than I'll probably ever be. He's a good-looking kid. He's fit. He's smart. He's funny. He just got married to a woman I've never met, but she seems wonderful. He's got a ton of friends. He's traveled the world. I go on his Instagram. He's in Spain. He's in Italy. He's in Greece. He's doing everything, man. This kid, by the world standards, is knocking it out of the park, and yet I know he is not chasing after Jesus at all. And sometimes that's where we settle with our shepherding. It's we're okay that our kids are making bank. We're okay that our kids are making friends. We're okay that our kids are doing all these great things. How often do we as parents settle for our kids being filled in every way except spiritually? all the trophies, all the scholarships, all the accolades, none of them hold a candle to Jesus. And we have to address that. Don't settle for giving your family anything less. Husbands, the most important thing we can give our wives is not a bigger house or a nicer car. And wives, I'm not saying that's wrong. If we can get that for you, we'd like to, all right? But the best thing we can give our wives is to show them more of Jesus. Dads, the most important thing we can give our kids is not more stuff, nicer phones, better shoes, more schedule, things like that. It's giving them more Jesus and more of us to model Jesus in their life, because our kids are watching us and they will be influenced us. How easy is it for us to settle and not to think of the legacy that's at stake? Elimelech's legacy was he took his family to Moab, and his sons followed after him. Look what happened to them. First, their father settles in his shepherding, and then we see that they marry Moabite women. His sons married women that they were not supposed to be. Not only were they not supposed to be with them, they married them and brought them into their home and brought them into their lives. At this time, God forbid that. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3 said that, and yet they did not listen to God's instruction in their life. They settled. Bethlehem was only 30, 40 miles away. They could have went back. They could have said, you know what, we need to be married. It's time for us to get married. We need to go back and find a woman who follows the same God we follow, who honors the same God that we honor. Find a girl that loves God, but they refused to do that, and they settled for the Moabite women. Young single men, young single women, listen to me in the room right now. Don't settle. It is worth the wait to find someone who will chase after God just as much as they will chase after you. God tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? What this verse is telling us is that if you enter into a relationship with someone who is not in the same standing with you when it comes to faith, you will have unnecessarily hard situations in your life. Some of us are settling with our spouse, though. Some of us, when it comes to those relationships, we are settling with our spouse, either the spouse we have or the spouse that we want. Some of you maybe aren't married yet, but you are chasing after someone, and you're dating, right? And you say, well, we're not married. We're just dating. Well, let me ask you this. What's the next step? What's the next step after that? It's either marriage or it's going to end, right? So every relationship is headed somewhere. If it's not ending in marriage, it's just going to end. So what are you doing here? What are you doing? We need to go after people who we can not just spend our life with, but our eternity with. Why would you want to spend your life with someone but not your eternity? Stop settling with your spouse. Your biggest desire for them should be for them to know Christ. And some of you are already in that situation. Some of you are already with someone, either married or engaged or dating. You're with someone and you know Christ and they don't. So my question for you, I wouldn't say, hey, dump that person immediately. I would say, what are you doing to bring them to Christ? Because if you're settling, you might not be doing anything. You might say, well, that's a hard conversation. I don't really want to go down that road. It just leads to a fight. Maybe you need to have the fight. I can tell you, having someone you walk through life with who shares your faith is such a blessing. My wife and I last week celebrated 22 years of marriage. Hey, that's awesome. We celebrated big too. We got Mexican food, no beans, all right? No, no, we did not. But let me tell you something. It's not been an easy 22 years. Definitely not for her. She married me, right? But we have seen in our lives, in the family, in the people around us, we've seen sickness, we've seen loss, we have seen pain, we have seen hurt. We have gone through so many things. I can tell you, I genuinely do not know how I would have gotten through some of the things or handled some of the things that we have handled if she did not know Christ and if I did not know she was praying for me or with me or beside me. My wife is a prayer warrior, and I'm blessed to have her. So dad settles in the wrong place. His sons settle for the wrong kind of women, and we are still just 5 verses in to the book of Ruth. So let's go back to it in verse 6. It says, then she, which is Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So what we find is that they left Bethlehem, they went to Moab to get food, and what do we hear? God has blessed Bethlehem. God visited the faithful in Bethlehem, but not the unfaithful in Moab. God didn't bless Moab. And it reminds us that God wants to bless us, but we have to be in the right place for him to bless us. We have to undo patterns sometimes that we put into place in our life so that new good patterns can begin. Here's a question. Are you in the right place in your life that God can bless you? Or is there a pattern right now that would hinder that? Are you making choices and settling in things that is robbing you of the blessings of God? What you need to do is you need to make that shift. Just like Naomi says, I got to get out of Moab. I got to go back. That's what Naomi does. Verse 7, it says, so she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go, return, each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and they wept. You can just hear the orchestra playing. It's sad here. Naomi and Ruth and Orpah. It's emotional. Naomi says to the ladies, she said, it's time for you to go back home. I've got to go where I'm going, and you've got to go back to where you're going. Think about it. These 3 ladies just lost their husbands. Naomi also has lost her 2 sons, and really all they have left is each other, and they're trying to pick up the pieces and figure out what's next for them, all the stuff they've been through together, and now Naomi is saying, well, time for us to separate. It's time for our journey together to end. Our time is over. Verse 10 says this, and they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it's exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So despite the setting, we see that these true women truly had a bond with each other. They loved each other. Naomi loves these women, and these women love Naomi, but it makes it hard. But Naomi's saying, listen, I can't provide for you. I don't have any more sons for you to marry. I'm old. I'm not going to have any more kids. And even if I found a husband, even if I was pregnant, are you going to sit there and wait for my new children to grow up? Are you going to wait that long just for me? No, I'm not going to put that burden on you. It is time for you to go. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to ask you to wait around. Go live your life. And maybe Naomi's just truly looking out for them. Maybe she truly cares about them. Or maybe just the thought of bringing some Moabite women back to Bethlehem is in the back of her mind saying, I can't bring you where I'm going. I don't really know. She's thinking of the embarrassment of coming home after leaving with her family and coming home with just Moabite women. What it's a little both. But what we do know is that Orpah weighs out her options, and she does head back, but not Ruth. Listen to what happens next. It says, and she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. So what Naomi is not doing here, she's not teaching us how to evangelize. All right, because Ruth is saying, like, desperate to go to Bethlehem, and Naomi is saying, no, just go back to your gods. Go back to your false gods, Ruth. That's the opposite of what we ought to be doing. If we have friends who come to us and say, hey, man, I've grown up this way, but I'd like to come to your church and check it out. And you say, no, don't do that. I'm telling you, don't do that. All right, but that's what Naomi is doing here. She's basically pushing her away and telling her, no, go back. But Ruth doesn't take no for an answer. In verse 16, it says, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you, for where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So Ruth lays it out. She says, listen, I'm not going anywhere. You are my people. I'm leaving my gods behind, and I am going after your God. Your God is my God now. Your people are my people. Where you go, I go. Where you die, I die. We're in this together. Ruth would not compromise. She would not take no for an answer. She says, you're not talking me out of this. She was determined she was not going to settle. In a story where everyone settles, Ruth says, absolutely not. We have 2 women here, Orpah and Ruth, and both of them love Naomi. Both of them would like to stay with Naomi, but one stays and one goes. Orpah had one foot in, 1 foot out. But when the rubber hits the road, when it all hit the fan, when reality kicked in and things just got a little too uncomfortable, she's out. Orpah's gone. She went back to her gods, and she was never really committed. And that kind of reminds us about settling with our salvation. We talk about settling in a bad way, but it's important that you are settled with your salvation today. Have you settled your salvation with Jesus, or do you have 1 foot in and 1 foot out? That was me for a long time. Are you truly committed, or when things don't go how you hoped, do you bail? Listen, there is no 1 foot in, 1 foot out followers of Jesus. You're either all in or you're all out when it comes to Jesus. Listen again to the words of Ruth and ask yourself if you've made this commitment in your life when Ruth says, "For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more, if anything but death parts me from you." In other words, no matter what happens in this life, I'm committed to you. Can we say the same as it relates to Jesus? If you can't, I would tell you, don't delay. Don't put it off. Don't waste any time. Jump in. There is so much blessing on the other side of your salvation in Jesus. And Ruth hits Naomi with this. Naomi is quiet, and they head home. And you have to imagine the tension is rising for Naomi as she heads back to this place, wondering what people are going to think, wondering what people are going to say about her and about Ruth, and coming back to these people, this God that she and her family had deserted. And she's coming back not with her husband, not with her 2 boys, but with this Moabite woman. Verse 19 says, the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. Everyone was talking. Everyone's whispering. The shame that might have been going through Naomi, wondering what people are saying, wondering what people are thinking, and the fear that must have been going through Ruth, this new place. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" And they get a mouthful they are probably not expecting. She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." Naomi, her name originally, Naomi means pleasant or lovely. But she's saying, nope, that's not my name anymore. My name now is Mara because I'm bitter. And then she said, "I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." That's a tough statement. Oftentimes we read this and we think about the emptiness of Naomi, but I want you to consider, as she said this, Ruth is standing right next to her. She said, "I went away with everything, and I've come back with nothing." And Ruth is standing right here saying, "I'm nothing?" Think of the devaluing of her life there. How small she must have felt. She must have felt so unworthy with that statement from Naomi. But what a reminder to us that when we feel unworthy, when we feel worthless, when the world devalues us, we have a God who always includes us, who sees value in us. And if you don't know what your value is to God, God thinks you are worth dying for. That is your value, that our sin and the law would exclude us from God's family, but now the grace of Jesus includes us in. And so Ruth continues, says, "Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, was with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is the end of the first chapter. What a fun story so far, right? People are dying, people are starving, people are bitter, people are sad, people are heartbroken, and it feels like, where is the hope in all of this? And the hope is right here. The barley harvest. And it's just a small little glimmer, because what started with famine is ending with harvest. And maybe your life, you've gone through those stretches of spiritual famine, you've gone through those stretches, but I want to encourage you today to look for the glimmers of hope. The harvest was coming, spring was on its way, and the famine had passed. So for you, I would tell you, don't give up hope. For some of you today, you feel like your life relates a lot with Ruth chapter 1, because you have seen nothing but struggle and heartache in your life. It feels like you keep getting knocked down over and over and over again, bad news after bad news, and if you're honest, it's frustrated you, it's bothered you, it's angered you, and you may not want to admit it out loud because we never say this in church, but you've become bitter with life. You've become bitter with the people around you. You've become bitter with your situation, with your job, even with yourself. And yes, maybe you're even bitter at God today. Listen, the harvest is coming. The famine will end. The storm doesn't last forever. You might be in it right now. But I would tell you, if you're in it right now, you have a choice. You can either waste this trial that you're going through, or you can let this trial be your training. The danger is that we can get to a place where we are settling with our suffering. Never settle for our suffering. Some of us go through trials and it makes us bitter, and bitterness takes roots and it grounds us in that, and we stay that way forever. And we're always seeing the negative. We're always seeing the failures. We're always missing what God is doing. We never see the barley harvest coming because we stay bitter. What you might need today is move from bitterness to brokenness. One more verse to share with you. Psalm chapter 51 says, my sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. 51st chapter Psalm is a great psalm. I would encourage you to read that and read up on why it was written. Talk about a situation that could have left someone bitter, but instead broken. Where might your bitterness need to shift to brokenness in your life? Don't waste the famine in your life. Don't let your suffering be for nothing. Shift to brokenness. What's the difference? Bitterness, like I said, takes root and keeps us there. Brokenness says, God, put me back together. So where are you today? Are you settling in your shepherding? Are you settling with your spouse? Are you settling with your salvation? Are you settling with your suffering? As we lead our families, are we making sure that they are spiritually filled? Or is that all secondary to everything else? Are we seeking someone in our life that will not just honor Christ with their life, but help you do the same? And are you settled with your salvation? This is the most important one. Because if we don't have this, we can forget about the other stuff. If we don't have that assurance of salvation in our life, everything else is wasted time. Make sure your salvation is settled. Maybe you're like Orpah, you've got 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I would encourage you, jump all the way in when it comes to Jesus. For me, I was a church kid. I heard a million messages, heard all the stories, heard some great preachers, heard some bad ones. Some were so bad I prayed for Jesus to come back right in that moment. I can't take no more. But can I tell you something? I always thought that it was going to take something new, something like some obscure verse from like Obadiah or something that I'd never heard to really help me understand. What finally got through to me was a verse maybe you're familiar with, John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. When I finally realized that's about me, I dove in. It was 27 years ago, and I haven't looked back. I've fallen a lot. And I've seen some famine since then, and I've suffered, and I've settled. But Jesus hasn't abandoned me, and he never will. So if you're here today and you haven't settled your salvation, today would be a great day to do that. For the rest of us who are followers of Jesus, don't settle for second best. Chase after him. Let's close with a word of prayer. Father, we come to you this morning. We just thank you for hearing us. We thank you for your word, Psalm 116, that says you bend down to listen. I'm thankful, Lord, that you can hear me as I speak, and you hear those of us who are praying to you. Not even with our audible words, you still hear our hearts and our minds. And church, as I pray right now, if you're here today and you need to settle your salvation, it's as simple as calling on Jesus. And I would love to walk you through that. It's a simple prayer, and just pray this with me. Say, Father God, I submit my life to you. I lower my pride, I humble myself, I confess my sins. And God, I believe that you sent your son Jesus to live for me, to die for me, and that he rose again and Jesus is alive. I ask you to enter into my life so that you can be my king. As we continue to pray, Father, help us to not settle in life. Help us to not settle in our shepherding. Help us to lead our families well. Help us to not settle in our search for a spouse. Help us to find someone that will honor you and chase after you. And help us to not settle in our suffering. Help us to stay clear of the bitterness that life can bring and take our brokenness to you.